Okay. All right, everybody. Well, welcome once again to another peer mentoring chat of the Yale Ciencia Academy program. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about feelings of isolation and feelings of imposter syndrome, which are common occurrences in graduate school and really throughout a career in science at different points. These peer mentoring chats, our expectation is that these are really safe spaces for you guys to kind of hash out these topics and, share anything that you might have questions about or might be wondering about or would like some advice about. But we also have with us a great resource that can help give a little bit of background and a little bit of really informed perspective on the particular topic we're dealing today with. So we have Dr. Sherilynn Black. Say hi, Sherilynn.
Hi, guys.
And we're really lucky to have Sherilynn. Sherilynn is an assistant professor of the practice in medical education at Duke University in the School of Medicine. She has an undergraduate degree in psychology from the UNC, and then she completed her PhD in neurobiology from Duke University as well. She transitioned from a career from research to a career where she still does research. She doesn't work with neurons anymore. She works with young minds. And her research focuses on designing programs and the impact of programs that are meant to address diversity and inclusion in the sciences. So she's the founding director of the Office of Biomedical Graduate Diversity at Duke University School of Medicine, which is really a resource for Duke graduate students from diverse backgrounds. She hosts through that office a series of professional development opportunities, academic enrichment programs, mentoring programs, pipeline programs from summer research experiences to graduate training. She has been she has been funded for this work from the NIH and other agencies and funding sources. And in her role, she advises and talks with students and provides resources and support to students of all stages. She's also very involved with SACNAS, with the National Research Mentoring Network, with the American Association for Medical Colleges and Universities. So she really is, a really great resource. So welcome, Sherilynn. I don't know if there's anything you want to add about your background for this topic.
I think that mainly I would just say, number one, I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to talking to you guys for a while. It sounds like your program is amazing. I can definitely relate to all of you. I have been in your shoes at one point or another. I am definitely somebody who did not start out thinking I was going to be a faculty member and sort of had a very windy road to get here. I'm the first person in my family to go to graduate school on either side. So I'm sure you all can imagine that my parents are disgusting whenever anything is discussed about what I'm doing right now. They're so excited. But most of all, I just really believe that I'm here as a resource to help you guys out. Anything that I can do, please just, I'm really here to talk to you and to answer questions, to be a part of your chat. And I'm a scientist who also does diversity work and does a lot of national work, but also can relate to you. So it's, anything you want, I'm here to just sort of be open and to just be a resource to you today. So I'm very happy to talk to you and to get the conversation started.
Thanks, Sherilynn. So the discussants for the topic today are Aynette, Janet, and Rocio. So I'll leave it up to you guys, to you ladies, to kick it off.
So hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So first off, I wanted to start out by sending a shout out to our Ciencia familia, and thank you all for being here tonight. I had the extreme pleasure of working with Gabriela Ainet, who we prepared for today's topic, which famous people like Albert Einstein, Maya Angelou, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, people we all know and love and who are extremely successful have all experienced at one point or another. And so, Sherilynn, this first question goes to you. Could you please give us your definition of imposter syndrome? And then my second question would be how isolation is related to and may increase the negative impacts of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I always like to sort of start out defining a topic because I think it helps to sort of get everybody on the same page. So like you said, imposter syndrome is something that all of us have experienced. It doesn't matter who we are in the world, whether we are a student all the way up to a professor, whether we're in industry or at NIH. But basically what imposter syndrome is a syndrome where you basically feel that you are not good enough to be somewhere, that you're not as smart as someone else, you're not as capable. A lot of students, I see this sort of perpetuating itself, where students will say things like, oh, I feel like I got into graduate school because I was on a minority fellowship, but I'm not as smart as everybody else here. And I didn't go to a big school for an undergrad. And, I don't have this and I don't have that. And it's all about sort of the idea that you actually are an imposter in the space that you're in, that you are a fraud, that you don't belong. What we do know is that because of cultural norms and because of the very low numbers of underrepresented students in the sciences, a lot of research has shown that a lot of us underrepresented scientists can tend to experience this phenomenon more frequently than maybe students who are not underrepresented do. So if you are already in an environment where you're already sort of having self-doubt and worry, and then you look around and there's no one else that's similar to you, so you can sort of normalize your feelings, it can make you think, well, maybe I really don't belong here, and maybe I can't fit in with everybody else, and maybe that's really what's happening. Now, the good news is that this is not something that's only unique to underrepresented students. It's just that we might experience it a bit more frequently and a bit more intensely than other students do. And so what's most important is that we know that data. We're all scientists. We know that that's data. It's out there. We might have a likelihood to experience it more frequently. But now that we know that, being able to give that feeling a name and to own it and not sort of be afraid of it and run from it, but say, okay, I know that every student experiences this. I know I might be experiencing it just a little bit more than other students. How do I handle that feeling? That's really what I think is the important thing. All students experience imposter syndrome. We just might experience it a little bit more.
And then for my second question, thank you so much for the elaborate answer.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
Sure.
On point in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
My second question would be, how do you tie that in with isolation, and how
Yes.
can you increase that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you guys know this already, but being a scientist, a huge part of being a successful scientist is to be in the scientific community. And that community might be in your lab. It might be in the program that you're in right now. It might be in your classes. But what can happen a lot of times, if there are small numbers of people who maybe you feel that you can identify with, whether it's through race, whether it's through stage of training, whether it's through how much experience you have, you can tend to maybe feel a little bit socially isolated or further removed from maybe wanting to study with the other students, or maybe wanting to ask for help because you don't want to seem like you don't understand something. But the problem with isolation is that it allows you to create false narratives in your mind. So if you don't have anybody else that you can relate to or bounce ideas off of, or say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, are you feeling the same way? And sort of realize that you're not alone. Isolation can sometimes breed and lend to other emotions that actually are not helpful or fruitful for you to be successful. So I think it's actually very similar with isolation. Many of us, when I went to graduate school, I know I look like I'm 12. I'm actually older. Believe me, I'm a faculty member. I know this happens all the time. People always think I'm a student whenever I do things like this. But I remember when I applied to graduate school, none of the grad schools that I applied to, this was in, I guess I went to grad school in 2001. None of them had ever graduated a minority in a neurobiology department. It was not that long ago. Just to put that in perspective, in 2001, none of the schools that I applied to had graduated a minority student with a PhD in neurobiology. And so I remember at that point realizing, no matter where I go, I'm going to be the only one. And what is that going to mean for me in terms of being isolated, in terms of feeling like I don't belong? And I really thought very carefully about finding an institution that I thought would have a supportive mechanism outside of lab and outside of the department, because I knew that isolation could breed, even worse imposter syndrome and feelings of self-doubt and things of that nature. So it is important to have community. It's extremely important. If you don't have a community of people that are like you, look for other types of commonalities. It might just be, like I said, the stage of training that you're in, maybe somebody who's in a class, maybe somebody who shares a hobby with you. But having a community so that you can be supported and that you are not sort of facing your academic challenges alone is really, really critical to overcome feelings of isolation, which can make imposter syndrome worse.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherilynn.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I wanted to open up to everybody in the group. If anybody has had any personal experiences that they want, or maybe some friends or family members that have also experienced imposter syndrome, please feel free to share. I have one, but I want to hear from everybody else. So, yeah.
Well, hi everyone. I want to share an experience that I had. As an undergrad, I study psychology. And during my, third year, I entered an NSF undergraduate research program. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. And I worked at a neurophysiology lab at the UPR Medical Science campus.
Mm-hmm.
At my university, the psychology degree was under the social sciences department, so I didn't have that biology background or natural sciences, and I really felt like I didn't belong there. I felt like I couldn't be as good as the other students in the lab. Although that I had to go through an extensive application process that includes several interviews that evaluated a lot of my performance as a student, but still I didn't believe that I had what it takes to be there. I felt like a lot of anxiety every time that I entered the lab. I was afraid that if they asked me a question of which I didn't know the answer, they would find out that I was some kind of, I don't know, like a fraud or something. It was very, very hard. And I was very hard on myself. And I still think about it, and my emotions start to rise. But how did I manage this situation? I talked to one of the grad students of that of that lab, and I told her how I felt. And for my surprise, she felt the same way. At that moment, I realized that it was hard for everyone to enter a new environment that was challenging to students from different backgrounds. And I think that the support of my lab, also my PI, I talked to my PI, and that helped a lot. That I felt that truly helped me overcome those fears, and they normalized my experience. So sharing this experience, maybe I hope that someone can identify. I think everyone has felt this way at some point. And now I ask Dr. Black or everyone, what else could you do to first identify the symptoms, and if it's okay to talk to another person, what strategies would you use to manage this syndrome?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is thank you so much for sharing that story. I noticed a lot of people nodding while you were telling your story, so I think a lot of people were able to identify with that. And one thing that really stood out to me that I'm really glad that you shared was that the person you went to for help told you they were also feeling the same way. And, one thing that I think happens a lot of times in your undergrads is that you sort of feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't belong here. And then you go to graduate school and you think that like magically all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, I belong here. Like I'm a brilliant person and I got into graduate school. But then all of a sudden you're in a PhD program and everybody's smart and everybody's this, and then it starts happening again. And so one of the best things is that you've already identified that at this stage of your training, because I work with undergrads and grad students, and there are a lot of grad students who have never before fully understood that this is what they're going through, and it's very hard for them later on in their training to sort of tease apart what's happening. I would say, what you did is one of the best strategies to actually reach out to somebody else and just try to normalize, because that can sort of help you to understand, is this normal? Am I being crazy? Because, there will be some times where maybe you interpret something a certain way and somebody else says, I really didn't see it that way. And then that can also be informative to you, because it can let you see like, okay, well, maybe I'm not looking at this the same way. But I always tell people that, and again, it goes back to the first question about community, having a group of people that you trust to be able to share information with is really important. The other thing that I feel really strongly about, and that I'm working now with Howard Hughes and NIH to help with, is helping faculty to understand the signs of imposter syndrome in their students. Because a lot of times faculty can inadvertently make your imposter syndrome worse without realizing that that's what you're actually experiencing. So for instance, if you're not answering questions, like you said, you didn't want to so there's something called stereotype threat. And there's also something called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the internal belief that you can accomplish a goal. Stereotype threat is the idea that if you do something that might not look great or might be sort of viewed in a pejorative context, that you can perpetuate a stereotype about your cultural background or about something about you. And so, I have a lot of students who, English might not be their first language, or maybe their first generation, or maybe, like you said, maybe they don't have a ton of classes or the same background as some other students. And a lot of times they'll tell me, you know what? I was the only Latina woman in that class, and I did not want to make it seem like I didn't understand, so I didn't say anything. And then, because they don't want to perpetuate the idea like, oh, Latinos are not as smart, or oh, maybe I can't handle this. Well, then the flip side is the faculty member's like, oh, she's not saying anything. Let me start calling on her more. Let me push her, because maybe she just needs encouragement, but they don't realize that might be making your imposter syndrome worse. So one of the things that we've been working on, and we always talk about with students, is really making sure that you are in a lab where you feel very comfortable with your PI or with your advisor, because a lot of times they can be really key with helping you overcome imposter syndrome as well. If they understand that this is how you're feeling, and it is not in any way reflective of sort of your academic ability, but it's more of you just sort of experiencing these emotions, sometimes they can be helpful with giving you more feedback, letting you know, yes, you're doing this well. That can really go a long way to sort of reduce those feelings of imposter syndrome. And then the other thing I would say is making sure that, so pretty much every university has got some sort of counseling and psychological services office. I know at Duke we call it CAPS, but they actually offer entire workshops on a regular basis about how to overcome imposter syndrome and kind of things like this, where a lot of students come together and talk about how they're feeling about things. My office also offers those things specifically for underrepresented students as well at Duke. So I think getting involved with people, not just your peers who can provide you with that community, but also with other people like myself or other faculty who are sort of sensitive to these issues, and being able to have very honest dialogues. I think that's really, really important, because what I always say is like, you guys should only have to be worried about the science. Like, that's my dream for all of you. I just want you to be able to go into lab and worry about like, what experiment should I run today? How should I be doing this? The fact that you're thinking about those questions, and then you're also having to feel feelings of imposter syndrome and first generation, and maybe English is not your first language and things like this, it adds levels on top of what you're already doing that I just think the reality is, getting resources to help you clear those levels away is always a good thing. And so, yeah, I think that it's a combination of those things. Getting with faculty and people, sort of mentors who you look up to, that you can talk these things through. They can put you to resources so they understand what's happening. And then also having community of your peers that you can talk to. I think those three things really help with imposter syndrome a lot. And I also think constantly in your mind revisiting these sorts of conversations where say like, okay, self, I just went to a webinar where we talked about this. Is this actually founded in real life, or is this me feeling like I don't belong? How do I figure that out? Let me go through the data points here. What has actually happened to indicate that I don't belong versus I feel like I don't belong? And a lot of times, if you really sit down and take a deep breath and start thinking things through, you realize, well, yes, this happened, but this other person's feeling the exact same way. The PI said the same thing to both of us. Maybe it's not that I don't belong. Maybe it's just that I'm sort of, building it up internally a little bit more. I know that's hard when you're in the lab doing a summer program, though, especially for a short period of time where you're, not necessarily getting to know everybody as deeply. So I think moving forward, that's definitely advice. And again, like continuing to talk about it on a regular basis and just keeping it a priority to always make sure that it's sort of like you're able to fight it as much as you can. I think that's all important.
Bianca wrote on the chat, she's interested in knowing how you actually teach graduate professors how to recognize it and approach it. Is there anything else you want to add, Bianca? No. Okay. Yeah. So like was shared earlier, I actually have an R01 with two faculty members from the University of Wisconsin, and Angela Byers-Winston and Christine Fund. And we've developed a curriculum it's just like you guys taking a class. We've developed a curriculum for basic science faculty members on how to be better mentors to underrepresented trainees. And a big part of what we're working with them is understanding, no, many of you have never experienced some of the things that some of these students are going through, but we're going to talk about how it can impact the scientific experience and how we can work with you on being able to better understand, the best way to be a positive mentor and to be a strong scientist in that process. And so we actually are just finishing up the first cohort of faculty. We had over 200 faculty members this summer from universities across the country who took our course for the first time. And many of them said it was completely life-changing. Howard Hughes is also picked up a version of our curriculum. We're doing that with Howard Hughes investigators. If any of you end up applying for the Gilliam Fellowship through Howard Hughes, you will see myself and Angela and Chris, because we work with both the mentees and the mentors for the Gilliam Fellowship to talk about these sorts of topics. And we really do treat it as continuing education for the faculty members. I think that a lot of times what will happen is, there might be like a workshop on imposter syndrome, and a faculty member will go and they'll sit there for, 40 minutes. And at the end of it, they're like, okay, great, whatever. But our feeling is, these are experiences that all of us live every day of our lives. It's not something that we can sit in for 40 minutes and walk away. So we really feel strongly that this should be treated rigorously as an academic topic and given the same respect as if you're taking a course on any other topic. So that's why we've developed a full-scale curriculum for the faculty, and that's why they have to make a significant commitment to the topic to be able to take our course. And so far, it's had really strong results. And the hope is that once the curriculum is optimized and it can be disseminated to many, many, many institutions all over the country, and faculty can start to gain these skills. That is amazing. I hope, as many professors as possible end up taking the course. Mm-hmm. Mari, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you put on the chat? I'm curious to hear your theory out.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry. If I break up, let me know, because my internet is a little funny today.
Okay.
This is a working theory I have in my head that based a lot on my own experience, but also observing other minorities of women, from women to just racial minorities to sexual gender minorities in the sciences. But we have the imposter syndrome that everyone else has, and that over time you can overcome this. But even when you overcome it, you're still often type of imposter syndrome, which is being treated like an imposter by others. Although you know you have the skill and the experience and the qualifications to do something, being questioned by junior people, being told you don't. I've actually had to leave a lab because of the way I was being treated. But one of the last things the PI said was, maybe you're not as good as you think you are at these things. And it was sorry?
Actually being treated differently, reinforcing kind of those feelings.
Right. So even when you work hard to overcome and prove to yourself that you have the skill or the experience needed, like in this lab, this particular PI would have junior people, like undergrads, questioning everything I did, and he condoned it. So like today I got into the elevator at my school, and one of those people was in the elevator, just glaring at me. So that's the kind of thing where it feeds into the isolation, because there's no, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's like making my blood boil to hear this story. I have to be honest. Like it's ridiculous. Like, but so there's a term for that as well. There's terms for everything in neuroscience and social science. So that's called explicit bias. And it is one of the hardest things, in my opinion, to deal with in the scientific community, because it happens not only like through what you're going through, where people literally have explicit biases against you for whatever reason, whether it's because they have their own, sort of formed opinions about where you come from or what you look like or what your training is or your ability level, whatever. But explicit bias is oftentimes coupled with something called implicit bias, which is bias that a lot of people will perpetuate, but they don't actually even, it's like literally a subconscious level where it's so ingrained in them that it just is automatic. So, I've seen this many times where I will be like on a study section or on a search committee, and, there will be the sort of thing of like the explicit bias where somebody might say something like, oh, well, this person came from this university, so let's automatically consider them, without really even considering if they're the right fit for the position, just because they have a bias towards thinking a certain type of institution is better than another. But then if you put that person up against somebody else with similar qualifications that might be from like a minority serving institution or something like that, people might, or this happens a lot. There's a lot of data showing this happens between men and women. There's a lot of data showing this happens between black and white, where people will sort of subconsciously prefer one type of person to another, and they don't even realize they're doing it. And there's actually something called, it's called like I think it's the implicit bias indicator at Harvard. If you were to Google implicit bias Harvard, this test comes up, and it actually lets you assess your own implicit bias, because you actually don't have the ability to do it sort of externally. But you can imagine it if you're combining implicit bias and explicit bias at the same time. It is super complicated because, oh yeah, thank you so much for that link. That's it. That's exactly it. Because the problem is, if you try to discuss explicit bias, people will oftentimes be very defensive and say, oh, you think I'm racist, or, oh, you think that I'm whatever, fill in the blank of an ism that's not a, positive thing. And then to sort of get them to explore implicit bias means you already have to have them in a space where they're even accepting the fact that they have bias in the first place. What I actually do a lot is I work with people on understanding that bias is a physiological and biological phenomenon. We all have bias. And so one of the types of trainings that I do for faculty and for administrators is to help them to sort of, it's sort of like, AA, the group AA, where they say the first step is to admit you have a problem. I literally work with the deans and the department chairs and the provosts to help them to, stop being defensive, stop explaining to me about all the things you do and all the places you volunteer and the fact that you have Black friends and Hispanic friends. Fine, that's great. What I would rather do is talk about the fact that you have bias. And your bias is going to impact the way that you lead, the way that you teach, the way that you train students, and the way that you make people feel in your immediate surroundings. And so there is a lot of that work that we do with the faculty and the administrators to help them. For you, what I usually tell students that they can do are two things. And one of them I find challenging. You may not find it as challenging, but they all sort of can be added up together. So the first thing is, as much as humanly possible, to keep emotions out of science. And that's going to sound strange, but I'll tell you why I'm saying that. So many times when students come to me, they will be upset about something that a faculty member said to them, or the way that somebody made them feel in the lab, or I'm trying to think, just something that basically elicits an emotional response. And what I always tell them is, because I do mediations as well as part of my job. So like if a student and a faculty member are having a problem, I'll sit them both down and we'll kind of work through it. But what always happens is, if the student approaches it from a space of emotion where they say, well, you make me feel like X, and I don't think that I deserve that in this and this and this, that is such a subjective context that it's really hard for people to understand that they're doing it. But if you sort of base it off of facts all the time and you keep up with it. So for instance, if you perceive that somebody's having bias, whether it's implicit or explicit, I suggest keep some sort of record of the instances of bias. So for instance, I remember once when I was a graduate student, there was someone in my lab who was white, and she would just do things that I felt were biased, but I didn't really know how to articulate it. So for instance, it was kind of like, I felt like she thought that I needed to kind of, not like clean up after her, but she would like leave things out, or like, kind of not set things up in the way that, not being a good colleague, basically. And I felt like she was largely singling me out and sort of expecting that I wouldn't have a problem doing these things after her. But I was just kind of like, I'm here for the same reason that you are, and we're not doing this today. And so I talked to my advisor about it, but the first time I went, I was like all riled up, and I was like, and she's like doing this and doing that. And he was like, oh, well, sometimes students can be territorial over projects. And he kept just being like really apologetic about her, like telling me that I maybe needed to calm down. And then that's like stereotype threat, because I didn't want to be the crazy Black person who was in lab, considering that there was nobody else Black in my department. So I was like, okay, maybe I should be quiet. But she kept doing it, and it was making me feel uncomfortable. So finally what I started doing was keeping track of it. And I was like I'm not putting emotion in this. I'm just going to be very factual. And I literally made a list, and I went and sat down with my advisor, and I said, I want to readdress this subject, but this time I've got data to share with you as a scientist. He was like, what? And I went through every instance where I felt like she had done something inappropriate. And by the end, he basically apologized to me and said, because he's never been in a space where he's had to really feel like he's had to experience these sorts of things, he automatically assumed that it was really about the science. Because why wouldn't it be about the science? Because that's all he's ever had to deal with. So he was like, oh, she's, it's just a science thing. And I'm like, no, believe it or not, there are some people who exhibit bias on a daily basis. And just because you don't identify with that does not mean it's not very real for me every day. We just have a student here this summer that I've been working with who's in our summer program, who is experiencing pretty significant bias at her home institution. And I've been working with her on strategies to how to handle it when she gets back. And a big part of it is that she feels like she's not been validated. Like when she tries to bring it up, the PI is kind of like, well, maybe you just need to work harder. It's not bias. You just need to, step it up a little bit. And so a lot of times it really is about opening the eyes of people who have never had their eyes open before. And another thing that I usually do is, especially if I'm working with faculty, I think it's a little bit more tricky for a student, but what I usually tell them is, I understand that you came to this institution to be a biochemist or an immunologist or whatever. I also understand that you may have not ever had to deal with this circumstance before. So I'm not coming here expecting you to be an expert on how to handle it. But what I am coming here with is asking you to be open to exploring the possibility that your actions are making your student have a difficult time. And usually if I kind of come at it from that angle where I'm like, I'm not accusing you, we're just going to work through this together. You're not a bad person. We just have to figure out what's going on. They're usually more receptive. So for you guys as students, I really think that if you really think you're experiencing bias, keep track of the instances of the bias. Definitely, you should all have like an Office of Institutional Equity or someone in your department even that's like a representative of like, different schools call it different things, but I mean, you know, depending on the level of bias, it can get just to the level of, I need to talk to a safe person about this and get some advice, all the way up to maybe I need to report this behavior. I would say with what you described, if someone's sort of glaring at you in an elevator, that's, to me, a little aggressive. And you should not have to deal with that. That's ridiculous, actually. And I just want to validate to you, that's not normal behavior that a student should have to deal with. You know, it's one of those things where it makes me so angry because I feel like I'll talk to students at different times and they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm dealing with this. Oh, but everybody. And I'm like, no, everyone's not like that. This person sounds like they're actually intentionally trying to maybe, you know, sort of intimidate you or something like that. And so I do think that, you know, that's not them being a good steward of the lab. And I do think it's perhaps something that could be shared with the PI. But since you said the PI is maybe also contributing to some of these experiences as well and making these comments to you, that's what I would maybe suggest, reaching out to someone that you trust, like a mentor that's not in your lab, but someone outside of it, to sort of bounce it off of them and see what resources exist in the space that you're currently at. Because, you know, that's one thing I can tell you for sure is you should not have to go day to day experiencing feelings like that. And the more you can do, you know, what I always tell students too is a lot of times you guys, I know, feel like you're not in positions of power because, you know, you're training, either whether it's you're in an undergrad or a summer program or a post-bac or a grad student, there's always someone over you. But every day that you choose to get up and go to that lab, you're in a position of power because you're actively choosing to go there. And so what I always say is like reframe it a little bit, where you can think about it in the context of, okay, today I am actively choosing to go to the lab and do my work. I am also actively choosing to either deal with this person's attitude or not deal with this person's attitude. If you choose to deal with the attitude and sort of like let them do whatever and kind of ignore it, that is your active power decision saying, I am choosing to allow this to persist right now. There are always consequences to every decision, positive and negative. You might also decide, today I am actively choosing to not deal with this person's attitude today. What it comes down to is that you're not powerless. You have the power to decide what you want your day to look like and how you want to feel. There are some times where you might say, you know what, I actually don't think it's worth it to fight with this person. You know, I might try to talk to them if it's not well received. I feel like I can handle this without having it totally disrupt my experience. But more often than not, sometimes people just need to sort of be informed of their behavior. And it can feel scary to start to think that you need to talk to somebody. And it might feel even like, you know, why am I the one who has to do this? But 9 times out of 10, I would say I have usually heard it go well. And I actually had to do this when I was a graduate student. I remember it very well because that's how nervous I was to have the conversation. All these years later, I still remember it. Where I had a male graduate student in my department. He used to just make these really strange comments to me that were always like racially tinged, but then he would always follow it up with, well, don't get offended, which is never a good way to start a conversation, right? Like, so he would say like, well, don't get offended. And then he would make a joke about an ethnic sounding name. And I remember once he made this comment to me in front of like my whole cohort. We were all together and he sort of said something like, well, how does it feel to you to know that you're going to be single all throughout grad school? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the only Black people that work at Duke work in the cafeteria. So how do you think you're going to meet someone? And I was like, what? And so anyway, you know, there were several things like this that happened. And after maybe like the third one, I literally was like, I'm in this, I'm here. I cannot persist for years in a relationship with this person and not say something, because it got to the point where I didn't even want to be around him. Like, I just felt like I was always on edge. And anytime he said anything, I would automatically think, oh, well, he's going to say X. And so, you know, my heart was racing and I actually like wrote out what I was going to say because I didn't want to get too nervous or upset, but I sat him down and I told him, I want to start out by saying that I'm really glad you're my classmate, and I feel like, I've enjoyed hearing about your background and learning about you, but I really want to share some things with you. And I basically just told him, like, some of the things you say make me really uncomfortable. And I don't even know if you're aware of it, but I feel like since we're building a friendship, it's important for me to be transparent with you, that I feel like, some of the things you say are hurtful to me. And he was completely shocked and was like, give me examples. But thankfully I had sort of like gotten all of my thoughts together. And when I gave them back to him, he was silent, and he said, I'm from California. We did not have the same experience with race as in the North and in the South. It's very different, the way that race and ethnicity are charged over here. And I honestly thought that those were jokes. I had no idea they were offending you. And he was mortified. He apologized to me. He also, I think, apologized to some of my other friends who were upset with him, and he never said it again. And I actually had a similar experience with my lab manager when I was in graduate school, who's actually still one of my best friends to this day, who was from a rural town, hadn't really been around people from different backgrounds and ethnicities before, and wasn't overtly trying to say anything that was inappropriate, but was just sort of consistently making comments, or would make comments about other people that were Black or Hispanic that weren't me, but then be like, oh, but you're different. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so I remember talking to her about that same thing. She was extremely embarrassed, mortified. We did, like I said, work through it, and we're still really close. This is like, 15, 16 years later, we're still really good friends to this day. But she told me she was very grateful that I gave her the opportunity to show me that she was not that person that she was showing herself to be. So all of that is to say, I do think that most people, typically, I always err on the side of they're not a bad person, they're just exhibiting ignorance. I know that I'm not perfect, and sometimes I exhibit ignorance despite my best intentions not to. So I always start there. But if the person's not receptive to even exploring the idea that they're making you uncomfortable, exploring the idea that they're treating you differently in lab, which you've already got examples of how that's happening, then sometimes it's best to explore another lab environment, or sometimes it's important to get somebody else involved who can help them to gain the skills that they need to gain so that they can make it a space for you to train. Because we are all supposed to make safe spaces for you guys to train, and it should never be that you're having to just persist in the midst of drama just to be able to do your work. And the last thing I'll say is, I also think that a lot of students really do follow the lead of faculty members. So if these students are seeing this faculty member sort of making like little snide remarks to you or little comments and stuff like that, that's building a lab culture that is not inclusive. And it's building a lab culture that says, it's okay for me to glare at him in the elevator. It's okay for me to treat him differently or make little remarks because I see the person in charge doing that. So I think it's really, really important to have mentors that are people that this is going to sound crazy, but people that you like and people that you respect as human beings and not just as scientists. I tell the students this all of the time. So many people want to come and work with people who have a Nobel Prize or who they saw on TV or whatever. But the mentoring you get when you're training is literally setting you up for the rest of your career. So if you're with somebody who is a huge jerk, it doesn't matter how big their name is. If you can't form a relationship with them, they might not be able to be a strong advocate for you anyway. So I think that it's got to be a mix of sort of how you feel in the lab and then how passionate you are about the science, and all those things need to gel together for you to work with somebody, because it's a privilege for you guys to work with us. It's not the other way around. It's not the sort of thing where you should look at it as, oh my gosh, like these people are up here and I'm down here, so I just need to sort of accept it. No, like every person that works with me, I feel so honored and I take it so seriously because I feel like I'm really shaping their future in science and their future careers. And I don't take people that I don't think I can be an effective mentor to. So I think that all of those things sort of work together. The good news is that a lot of universities are starting to do bias trainings for faculty and make them mandatory. For students, it's a little more hit or miss. Duke does require it for students, but I don't know how many schools are actually requiring it. But I will tell you, for both faculty and students, a lot of them, when they go through the training, it's the first time they've ever even heard of bias before. So So that's just to also let you know that this person, while they might be a grade A jerk, which it sounds like they are, whoever this person is glaring at you in the elevator, it sounds kind of ridiculous. It literally might be the definition of ignorance, where they need to be saved from themselves, basically. So yeah, if you continue to deal with that and you want to talk it through a little bit more specifically, I'm always happy to, you can always like email me or something and we can talk more about it. But just know that it's tricky concept and it's not easy. And it does take, strength and being in the power position, however you define that as a student, for you to sort of overcome those obstacles. But sadly, it continues on. And I will be honest and say, in this political climate, I think there are more people who feel a little bit more emboldened to say crazy things. I tend to err on the side of what you won't do is feel like you can come around my students or anyone that I work with and say ignorant things and think that it will be tolerated. Because regardless of what's happening politically in the climate, in the United States or anywhere else in the world, there still is civility and human decency and being a good colleague. And none of those things have changed no matter who's in office. So I feel very strongly that we should not sort of let bad behavior just run rampant. I think it needs to be called out and it needs to be shut down.
So I think I want to explore this topic a little bit later, a little bit more with the fellows. It's also something that I have discussions about with people and with students, and it's tricky. Like, when do you get involved? When do you take the time and energy, because it takes a lot of mental and emotional energy to address, a potential comment, microaggression or an explicit or implicit biased comment. When do you do that? When do you decide to retreat? When does it impact you to the point that you feel like you can't interact with a group of people anymore? So I want to ask the fellows, like, when you've experienced these type of situations, what is your response? How do you deal with this? And it could be, I'd be interested in hearing how many of you kind of just retreat to yourselves and just like, or choose to ignore it or try to address it, and how you address it.
I see lots of people saying they retreat. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Total isolation. Yeah.
I actually had a very small situation once. Well, it was actually after the election. I was supposed to go in December, which I went to North Carolina, and my mom was terrified of me going there. And I actually brought it up. We had a visitor from there, and she goes, what if she's afraid that girls and guys can't go to the bathroom they're supposed to go in, or they're afraid of what are they gonna do? They're not that brown. Obviously, in that situation, which was for me extreme, it's the most, I don't know, nobody had ever talked to me like that, especially when I'm talking about my mom being afraid and far away. I just shut down and walked away. But I think it's my PI, like you mentioned, is the best person. I've been able to talk to her, and I actually went to my PI and didn't complain about that because, again, I'm a minority and I didn't feel like I should complain about that. But I did express my mom's being afraid and all of that. So I do agree that my PI is like the best person.
So what ended up happening?
I ended up going, but I never made that comment to anyone. I think this is the first time I've said anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you just said is something that a lot of people have been through, and I do think especially the first time it happens, it's super shocking, and you don't know what to do, and so your natural proclivity as a being, as a biological being, is to retreat to a space that feels safe because you don't want to put yourself in harm's way, whether that's emotionally, physically, anything. But I agree with, I see that there's been someone in the chat wrote this, and I think that I would say the same thing is, usually my threshold for when I feel like I need to speak up and say something is when I feel like it is impacting my ability to be successful. And that would be personally, like it might not be professionally. It might be personally. It might be, professionally. It might be scientifically. It might be spiritually. It might be anything that's important in my life. It might be that my family is not comfortable, and that's causing me a lot of anxiety. I think that I always just think through what is the least path of resistance for me to be successful. And if I imagine that path, and that path does not have person X in it or person Y's comments, then I have to get them out. And I remember I saw a talk once. I was at the Society for Neuroscience, and this woman won an award, and someone asked her a question. She had been very successful at a very early age in science. And someone asked her, how are you able to be so successful so early? And she said, because as a woman who was, I think she was Hispanic, she said, I made the decision very early in my career, after having a few bumps with people that were ignorant, that I was only going to work with people and surround myself with people that I liked and that I respected. And she said, that completely changed the trajectory of my career, because it made her realize that, number one, she was able to get things done. Sometimes you look at certain people and you're like, oh, but their name is so big, or they've got this technique, or this person's so smart. No. It might be a different way that you have to accomplish it. It might mean you have to be a little more creative. It might mean it might take you a little bit longer, or you might have to think about approaching a different topic or strategy. But like I said before, every decision you make is a power decision. You are sort of in the driver's seat for your life, for your career, everything. So by her making that decision, yes, maybe it meant that there was something in another lab or with another student or another faculty member that she couldn't do. But what it did mean was that she worked really hard to find other ways to be happy. And I will tell you that in my own career, I really subscribe to that notion as well. When I first started, so I'm an assistant professor, but I have a very high level administrative position that most people don't get until they've got tenure and are like way down the road. And so when I first started this job, I had all kinds of imposter syndrome and all kinds of concern about bias and aggression. People looked at me, they thought I was too young to have this job. I wasn't qualified, all these things that I was internalizing on a daily basis. And I really found myself sort of jumping through hoops to make sure certain people liked me or were happy with me. And it was just, one day my boss actually sat me down, who was the dean, and she said, I can't tell you how to run your career, and I can't tell you how you should be feeling. But what I will tell you is that other people who might not be like you would never deal with that sort of behavior from someone else. And that really stuck with me, because I've never felt like I wasn't a person that was confident or capable. But when she told me that, I sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, I can't imagine another one of my colleagues letting somebody sort of, interrupt them in a meeting or take the floor or do whatever. And so I made a decision right then. I was not going to tolerate it anymore. And once I changed my behavior, I noticed that people adjusted their behavior to adapt to how I was acting. And it was hard a little bit, and I was a little bit afraid, and I thought people were going to think that I was, doing too much or speaking up too much or fulfilling a stereotype of somebody that was Black, and all these different things that were in my head. But what I realized was I was so much more effective at my job, because I wasn't feeling like I was intimidated or like anybody could, make me uncomfortable. And then people were really responding well to how well I was performing. So what I would say is, if someone says something like that to you again, or anything else where you're just like, whoa, like, I don't really know how to handle that, I would think about if it's the sort of thing that's going to stop you from being able to be successful. And if it is, do your best to deal with it and nip it in the bud. If it's somebody who's just dumb, and, trust me, they're out there, believe me. There are some people where I've just rolled my eyes and I keep it moving, because it's like what you said earlier, like, life is short. I'm trying to do my work and be happy and have a life outside of lab and do all these other things. So it's not my job to educate you on your bias. And I feel very strongly about that too. It's not you all's responsibility to make sure that your lab is a hospitable environment. That's your PI's job. It's not your job. So you should not have that burden on you if other students don't have that same burden on them. So I definitely feel very strongly that, you know, if it's an issue and you don't want to have to sort of be in the driver's seat, talk to your advisor, let them help you navigate it. But if it's not being handled in a way that is satisfactory for you, then like I said, talk to people who can help you or make the power decision about whether or not you want to stay in that environment or leave that environment. And the good thing for you is that it sounds like when you went to the experience, like maybe wasn't as bad as you thought it would be, things of that nature. So sometimes for all of us, having more data about things can be helpful. But I do think, you know, the election has opened up a lot of difficult topics, and it's exposed a lot of bias and a lot of, you know, feelings that maybe before people thought were politically incorrect, but now they're feeling a little bit more bold. And yeah, I am just not here for it. I'm not. If they want to, if they think they can, they have the right to say whatever they want to say. But I also have the right to say whatever I want to say. And, you know, we're here, and I'm all about sort of like student empowerment in my office. Like all of my students are like so sassy and like all about it, because I'm like, yeah, we are not here for that. We are excellent in science. We're getting fellowships, we're getting publications, we're winning awards, but we need to make sure this environment remains a space where we can train and everybody can feel like they are a part of this community. And, you know, everybody's behind me on that, but it definitely is one of those things where, you know, I just refuse. We've developed such a culture of that attitude that a student who's this was a medical student, not a graduate student, a medical student who's extremely conservative, and felt like he was, you know, wanted to say some ignorant things. Apparently they were upsetting to certain people. He went and complained that the medical school was not inclusive for people who wanted to be able to show ignorance on a daily basis, basically. And we were just kind of like, okay, well, you know what? You have the right to complain about that. We don't accept your notion, but that's fine. So the bottom line is you guys are empowered. You can do it. And yeah, like you don't have to tolerate it. And like I said, you know, I know specific situations can be hard. And sometimes you do need to take time and like unpack those specific issues. But it sounds like you did the right thing. Even though I know you felt like you needed to retreat, it still does sound like you thought it through. You tried to think through like, what's the reality of the situation? What is it going to mean? And how should I respond to it? So, but I know that wasn't easy. And it sounds like it was pretty scary. And it probably would have been for me too.
Ariadna, I think that's a really interesting anecdote. Do you want to share it? I'd be interested in knowing what prompted you to respond that way, which is really a very confident way.
Well, I didn't actually say. Well, the thing is, I was not in the same room. I was in the next room, but I get bored really easily, and the person I was working with was working on something individually, so I was just looking around, but I could hear the conversation from the next room.
Can you repeat it for the people on the phone that couldn't?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. No, I was just saying, kind of talking because I'm in the school.
Use code names in your story when you're telling your story.
Oh, I don't know their names. I just got here last week. I know their voices and I know their offices, but I don't know their names. So I was in the next room. The person I was with was working individually, so I got bored. And I started like looking around. I started listening to the conversation that was going on next door. And I recognized the voice of my PI, the person I'm supposed to be working with, and the student I'm supposed to be working with, who's a second-year PhD student. And he's asking like, well, I don't know, but is it normal that they don't have the skills to write that many syntax and run these kinds of analysis so fast? And it's like, they seem like they're struggling. And the PI was like, oh yeah, they're just clinical psychologists. And I'm like, well, what? I mean, I know what you're talking about. I can do stuff. I might not be able to do it with the proficiency you can because it's not what I do most of the time, but I can do it. So I thought about it and I was like, I'm not gonna, first I wasn't supposed to be listening, but I mean, they left their door open, so it wasn't really my fault.
It wasn't your fault. No.
Also, I don't I mean, I don't really care that much because really I'm working with them for the summer, and I'd like to be able to help them as much as I can, but I'm here for a learning experience, so whatever. And so obviously I ranted and raved to some of my friends back home. I'm like, well, this is just, I mean, what are we dumb? What is going on? And they're like, no, they're just different as well. And I'm like, fine. And I'm 32 and the student is 22, so I just went along thinking he's a child, he doesn't know anything. So I just went and got
That's probably true, actually.
So yeah, that happened yesterday.
Well, I'm probably with you. I probably would have handled it the same way. If you just got there, it's like you're sort of still learning the culture yourself and trying to see what people are talking about. But, the bottom line is the irony in all of this is that you're actually going to be so incredibly informative to this 22-year-old who probably has never met anybody like you before. And I think that, like I said, while it's not your job or your responsibility to educate them on anything, the example that I know you're going to provide by the fact that you're smart, you're confident, you're capable, it's going to do wonders to sort of break down some of their preconceived notions about people, regardless of what their academic background is. And I think you should feel really good about that because you're sort of like a trailblazer, even if you don't even realize it. So I would say, if they leave their door open, girl, look, it is not your problem if you hear what they're saying. And there's nothing wrong with jumping in, So it's interesting. One of the trainings that I was doing for faculty, we walked through an exercise with the faculty where a faculty member gave really harsh feedback to a student about a paper that they were writing. And we had the faculty to imagine that they were the student, and we were like, how would this make you feel? And of course the faculty are like giving their responses, and they're like, oh, well, I might feel, offended, or I might feel whatever. And then I read them the actual feelings that came from some students from underrepresented backgrounds who had read the same case study. And a lot of those students said, I would consider quitting school. I would think I wasn't smart enough. I would personally feel like I didn't belong here. And it was all of these like really intense, internalized responses. And what one of the faculty members said, which I thought was super interesting, is he said, it just hit me the difference between what you read and what I felt. When you read the experiences of the underrepresented students, they internalized every single part of this situation as a problem that they had created or that they were a part of. And then all of the students who were not underrepresented externalized it and thought it was someone else's fault, and they were entitled to a positive experience. So where the underrepresented students were all like, oh my, I felt terrible, and like, maybe I shouldn't be here, and I should go and vent to my friends. A lot of the white students were like, how dare you? How dare you say these things, and da-da-da-da-da. And it is a cultural difference. It is a difference. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there is a lot of like, in my family, there was a lot of like, you respect your elders, people who are older than you, like you are respectful of people, you should be very grateful you got into graduate school, and you should respect your PI, and you don't want to be disrespectful. So if they're doing something that's upsetting to you, you really don't need to be that person who can't work well with everybody. And, my parents are looking at this as like, this is an experience that they've never been through, and they know that this is a unique opportunity, and they didn't want me to screw it up. And then all of my, my friends who might not have been from underrepresented backgrounds were much more like, I demand to have a positive, lab experience, and I believe that you should be teaching me and inspiring me every day. And that was such a foreign concept. It seemed so entitled and like arrogant almost, like no humility. But what I realized is that's the culture a lot of scientists are used to, of just like sort of saying what they think without really attaching emotional responses to it, or just sort of like living in a space where they feel like they can, brutal honesty is the way to go because we're all equal, we're all equal. There's no color in science, this sort of notion. And so there is a little bit of a balance of like respecting who you are, and like you said, having control over your emotions and just rolling your eyes and keeping it moving. But then also understanding that, for some people, it does come down to finally having to correct the behavior only because they are only used to responding that way. So this kid, whoever this 22-year-old child, this plebe that was talking about stuff in the other room, like They just might sort of be a loudmouth who's running their mouth all the time and saying stuff. And it might, maybe what it's going to take is them realizing that you have opinions too. And believe it or not, the world does not revolve around their 22 years on this earth. Maybe there are other people who have got ideas. The flip side is maybe they're going to learn from your experience of being like, you know what, I do have opinions, but I also just really don't feel like giving you the time or energy to like talk about it. So I'm just going to keep it moving with my work, and maybe you can learn from that too. So you'll feel it out as you go along. But yeah, just know that the internalizing and like thinking about it and processing it is very healthy and normal. And I think that that's the way a lot of people sort of get through lab on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I'm super prepared for our meeting tomorrow. But
yeah. I might need to find out how that meeting goes.
So I wanna open up, if anybody wants to just jump in or maybe react to what you've been hearing. I think, Sherilynn has been giving you a lot of information that, shows that all these things we feel and experience and we think we're just, it's just us. Yeah, it's not. It's really not. And I think it's really important for us to realize that, like she said, it's really important that knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you think you might use this knowledge? How might you apply it?
Sorry guys, so if I may,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a really good question. And I know, Giovanna, you had said that on our document that we sent to all the YCA Fellows, there was a TED Talk by Dennis Simmons. And so I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to look at that TED Talk video, but she also, as a minority, she came from the Bronx and then she moved to Connecticut, and she used to always be pinpointed for pronouncing axing instead of asking, and the way that she was corrected, and it was in front of her peers and in a very embarrassing way. But now fast forward to that little girl who came from the Bronx and overcame so many obstacles, and some of the discriminative remarks that she experienced along the way. Now she got a Truman Scholarship, a Fulbright Scholarship, a Soros Fellowship, went to Columbia University, PhD, got a job at Harvard. So she's accomplished so much, and now she's actually giving back to her community in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. So when you raised the question about what you can do, having experienced this, we as minorities have that power to now make sure, protect the future generations, empower them, and make sure that perhaps, we know how it feels like. And we're telling you, you're not crazy, and you're not the only one feeling this way. And so for me, at least, it's a bit humbling to see people like Sherilynn and Giovanna and Monica, yourselves being people in power and just having the heart. Because sometimes you can have people in power who don't care, or who forget about their experiences in the past, but you empathize and you have heart and you care about your students, and you reassure us that it's okay. We know where you're coming from, know that you are outstanding, and that it's not just you. This is a common phenomenon, and just to keep on going. So I feel like that giving back, empowering future generations is something you can definitely do.
Yeah. I first of all, thank you for saying that. But I think I completely agree with you. And one thing I wanted to add to that, which I really hope if you guys take nothing else away from this, you take away, is that I tried for years to assimilate into a scientific environment. And I finally realized I would be far more successful if I was just myself. And I think that there can be a really huge draw when you are an N of one, like in this, you're one of the only ones, you're isolated, you feel like you're different. There can be a really strong draw to want to sort of hide what makes you different, especially if you are a racial or ethnic minority where you wear it every day. And it's not like I can hide that I'm a woman, that I'm Black, any of those things, right? And so, you know, you hide that you're first generation. You might change the way you speak a little bit because you don't want people to know that English is not your first language. Or maybe the food that you eat for lunch, you might, oh, maybe I should just go get a bagel so people don't see me eating up my food every day. You know, different little things that are important to you and who you are. Like, I'm Creole. My family's from Louisiana. I have gumbo for every major holiday, and it has crab legs sticking out of it, and it looks crazy. And I'm taking it to lab because that's what I like to eat. But I remember when I first started, I was like, I just don't want to stand out at all. I already feel like I stand out, so I'm not going to bring what I like to eat, and I'm not going to, you know, talk about music I like to listen to or certain TV shows or concerts I go to, because I just want everybody to think that I'm like them. And what I realized was, like, I am like them because I'm a scientist. That's how I'm like them. But who I am as a person contributes to why I'm a scientist in the first place. So if I try to smush that down, it actually prevents me from being the best scientist that I can be. And I feel like it took me a while to sort of appreciate that and understand that, but that's real. The people that I know, all my friends who are faculty who are killing it right now, it's all the people who are just themselves and they bring the science along for the ride. It's not the other way around. It's not people who are obsessively all about the science and they're like, you know, just adding in a little bit of who they are here and there. But it's like, just be who you are. I always tell my students, we have to celebrate who we are first, and then that will lead us to celebrating our science second. Look, I also do that to my rice, by the way. That is not just something that you guys do, so thank you. And it's making me hungry too. I know it's like 8:16 and I am hungry, so I'm feeling you on that. But yeah, I think, like, you know, every day you should think about, like, you know, what makes you unique. You know, I know somebody, his name is Rick Kittles. He's a faculty member who is just doing clinical research. And he basically, through his own research, actually before he started researching it, he was working on clinical trials of certain drugs. And basically what he realized was that in every single, like, the indications on the drugs, it would say something like, this tiny little, you know, footprint that would say, like, you know, I mean, not footprint, Lord, footnote, that would say something like, you know, perhaps not as effective in African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And it'd be like, what? Wait, why? And so he, you know, being the first one in that lab who was of an underrepresented background, he was like, pause. Why are we not looking at this? And they're like, oh, well, that's such a small number of people. He was like, right, but that's my family and that's me. So I'm going to have a different focus on this scientific question and concern than maybe you would, but I'd like to know why these are not effective in these three groups of people. So he ran major epidemiology studies and found out that the populations that were comprising the clinical trials were largely non-representative of the way that the country looked. So they were running trials that were like 99.9% white, and so people from underrepresented backgrounds were not actually even getting tried in the first 3 phases of the drug development. So the drugs that were optimized were not optimized for us. That was him bringing his personal lens to science, and he has literally changed the course of the way that clinical trials are done in this country. He is now there are tons of drugs that have been recalled and are being reassessed because of his analysis. Like, there are reasons why we might be more concerned about certain things than others, or I might think about a question a different way based off of something I've done in my background or something I've been exposed to. I hear all the time from people who are in biomedical engineering labs that people who have done manual labor a lot of times are more successful in those labs than people who have just done academic work, because you have a better spatial conceptual knowledge of how to fit devices together, how to develop devices. There are things that people with different skill sets will be able to bring to science who have never been able to have access to science before. So what I'm saying is, don't shy away from things that make you unique. Bring them to the table and embrace them, because that is what will get you successful in the end. And it will make it feel more fun, and it won't feel like such a chore or a job too.
Thank you so much, Sherilynn. So I also wanted to mention, as a part of like this discussion and talk, we've been talking about imposter syndrome and isolation, and sometimes the challenges that we as minorities face, and how that can add to imposter syndrome. What are some tips and strategies we can do? And I guess I wanted to touch bases on some of that. So, I think some of them have been mentioned already throughout the discussion, like, for example, talking to others about it. And then also what you just mentioned right now, that, focus on the value that you provide as a person. That is something that you can bring to the table. Mm-hmm. So then I was just going to ask before giving some couple of things that I researched, but from your insight, what are other things we can do in order to combat imposter syndrome when we feel like it? Not just perhaps as minorities, but also as PhD students. And, the whole academic rigor in the research field. There are
two things that I would say, one of which you may have done, but the other I'm probably pretty sure you haven't done. The first thing is you need to know what you're good at. And this might sound crazy, but I will tell you, honest to goodness, I did not have a discussion with someone about what my strengths were until I was on the job market. Because there's an assumption that you're smart, you've always been good at X, Y, Z. You sort of feel like you should be good at different things, or you are good at different things. But when I'm feeling doubtful about something new, it's always helpful for me to revisit the things that I know I'm good at, I know I'm strong at, and how I can apply those skills into the current situation. So I always suggest to students, no matter what stage you're in, to always have a running inventory. Like, sit down and take an hour and really think about what things do you like about lab and what are you good at in lab. And it might be technical things like running experiments. It might also be mentoring other students. It might be writing. It might be giving talks. Think about the things that you're good at and really hone in on those things. And think about how you can bring that same feeling and that same confidence into the situation that's causing you imposter syndrome. Like, for me, I know, like I mentioned with the situation with my friend, I have been told that I have a way of making people feel comfortable in uncomfortable circumstances. So even though I never thought I would have to apply that to a lab environment, I really made sure I brought that skill in when I was working with this guy of like, I really value our friendship and I just want to first thank you. Like, I really did a lot to make him feel good. And then I sort of laid the hammer down about, but I don't really like X, Y, and Z. And so, maybe if I was a person that was better, where I knew I was a strong writer, maybe I would have written my things to him instead of having a face-to-face conversation. Anything that you can do to keep yourself feeling as confident and strong and powerful in this scenario as possible, that's what I would do. And the way you feel that way is by sort of triangulating on the things that you are good at and that you're strong at. I wouldn't want to have a discussion about imposter syndrome in an area where I already sort of like, historically maybe had not been as strong in, and that would further sort of feed it into my head. So that wouldn't be good. So what I would think would be, another thing that I would say is just thinking about the way that, if it helps you, is to sometimes read papers. For me, that actually helped me a lot because as a scientist, I like to learn data. I like to read about data, and I like to think about, like, sometimes it's like really good for me to actually read these massive studies that have been done where I'm like, okay, so they did a randomized controlled study of 500 people, and 498 of the 500 people said that they had these feelings. Sometimes that can be really empowering. And it can be like, okay, this is not just my friend telling me they feel the same way. This is not just my PI saying that they sort of have this feeling. This is a massive group of people that are all sort of experiencing the same thing. So those two things, sort of knowing what your strengths are and using those, incorporating those into the scenario where you're feeling that imposter feeling, and then also continuing to educate yourself about what imposter syndrome is through reading papers, hearing talks, anything that can help you to have more information about what it is. I think those two things will help you to get rid of the feeling, or at least minimize it as much as possible.
Thank you, Sherilynn.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like some like other like tips, and you can feel free to comment on this, and I'm sharing it with all the YCA fellows.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes people might tend to downplay their achievements, and people might not see necessarily, it's because, okay, I want to be modest, or I want to be humble. But one of the things that I came across with dealing with imposter syndrome is just learn how to own your achievements. And like when a person compliments you and says, great job, instead of saying, you know, oh no, it's really nothing, which I myself also might tend to say thank you, and recognize, tell yourself, you know what, it took a lot of work in order to do
That's
something.
right. That's right. And I want to tell you all something right now, and listen to me, look in my eyes. I will tell you, I have heard so many students say, well, I didn't really want to share about fellowship X because I think it's a diversity fellowship. Or I feel like I might have gotten opportunity Y because it was a diversity summer program. Does that mean it wasn't competitive? Does that mean that it wasn't something that there was a study section that went through your application to determine if you were eligible? Does that mean that it wasn't created because there was already an inequity in the system that necessitated that we create these programs to make sure you all had opportunities? Yes. So you should be screaming from the rooftops if you get awards, fellowships, funding. Do not ever feel like you need to downplay, you know, oh, well, this is for women, or this is for Hispanic students, or this is for, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter. Celebrate it. There are so many students who are dying for funding. You have to fight for everything you're getting just like everybody else does. And if someone else wants to bring their own ignorance or bias into the equation, you cannot let that steal your pride, your joy, anything. And I actually, one of the things that I talked to the faculty about at Duke was the fact that you know, some of the students are like, well, you know, my PI always puts the awards up and he didn't put this award. And so I felt like that meant it wasn't that big of a deal. I talked to the PI and the PI says, you know what? I actually had never had a student who got that before. So I didn't know how big of a deal it was. It wasn't that I didn't want to add it. I just wasn't familiar with it. And so I said, oh no, look, like this is a really big deal. So then he had like a little, you know, gathering and it was all that. The point is, don't try to hide it. I mean that for everything. You should be walking through the halls where you're just like, I am amazing, pop my collar, like every day, this is me. That's how you should be walking around. There should be none of the timid, I just got to keep my nose down. It needs to be, you know, this is who I am. I'm proud of it. I'm here just like you are. We're going to work together on a team. Let's make magic happen. That's what it needs to be. So yeah, don't downplay your accomplishments. You guys are in this program. That's already amazing in and of itself. Like you need to be shouting that from the rooftops. So yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sherilynn. And so another tip that I also wanted to share was when you're expressing all these accomplishments and awards, we have a WhatsApp chat. And I gather inspiration from other YCA fellows when they're like, hey, by the way, I got this award. Like, it's a really big deal because we're doing it, see it collectively as we're doing it together as a group, as a family, YCA family. So one of the warnings they say in order not to feel imposter syndrome is don't compare yourself. Yeah. Instead, use it as an inspiration. So that's another tip that I perhaps wanted to share with everybody, that, you know, don't think of it as somebody else being better than you. It's, we're going to do it together, and maybe I'm not there yet, but I will be, you know. Yes. So that's for sure.
It's very true. I mean, science is a very individual pursuit in a lot of ways. And, you know, just like anything else you do, there will be, you know, people say hills and valleys, right? Peaks, ebbs and flows, all these sorts of analogies. But it's true. It all comes down to, there will be times when you feel like you are killing it. And it's like, no one can tell you anything about yourself. You're like a combination of like Beyonce and Rihanna walking through the halls every day, like just like sweat me, like this is the day, right? And then you have other days where you're just like, I suck. I can't get anything to work. My mouse died on the table and I broke this piece of equipment. Everybody goes through. So for me, that would be a day where I feel like, I don't know, Drake. I can't stand Drake, right? So it would be like a Drake day where I just feel like a loser in general. And I'm like, oh. Like everybody's got days like this. It happens. But I completely agree with you. Like trying to compare yourself to somebody who you perceive to be doing well is always wrong, because I guarantee you that that person's got something that they feel insecure about too. And they might be putting on a total facade and letting you think that they've got it all together when actually they might be struggling worse than you are. So I would never make an assumption that somebody else is doing better than you or that they're smarter than you or anything, because you until you walk in someone else's shoes, you just don't have the ability to say that they are better, worse, equal to you. It's just about you, and they're just your colleague that's along for the ride. So just remember that too.
Sherilynn, your sense of humor, I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody does. So I'm speaking on behalf of everybody. Thank you.
Well, trust me, that's because I work with students all the time. They have, as a young faculty member, I like to think that I'm hip. But my students actually made a list of banned words because they said that I'm like a year late with every slang word that comes out. So I'm not allowed to say, wait, fleek is on the list. They said that's been gone for 2 years. I didn't know that. Lit, they said that I use lit. I overuse it, so it's taken away the joy. I can't remember the others, but there really is a list of banned words that they've stopped for me. So it's always fun to be able to meet new students where I can try it out and you all can think I'm cool at least for a little while.
Well, I think we can all agree that Sherilynn is of the chain.
Well, that makes me feel wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherilynn. This has been amazing. I mean, I think we all feel like this empowerment, this energy. It's been great just for me to experience talking with you. I'm sure the fellows all agree that we really appreciated this conversation. We really, I think, appreciated knowing the terms, knowing the facts, having the tips and the advice. So thank you so much for your participation, and thank you guys. Thank you all the fellows for all your contributions and your chat and your attention. So we'll see you guys later in August. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. And if you guys are at any conferences, I know I'll probably be giving talks at, probably Society for Neuroscience, probably SACNAS and Abercams, a couple other places you guys might, I'm just trying to think about places you guys might be, but if you're ever at a meeting and you see that I'm on the docket, feel free to see if we can get coffee or get together or something. So always reach out, but I'll be at all those places. And if you do go to SACNAS or Abercams, we also have a booth for Duke that I'll probably be at back and forth too. So hopefully I can connect with you in person at some point too.
Awesome. Yes. Maybe we can connect, and if you can send us that information, we'll definitely share it with the fellows.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Oh yeah, I see someone says, see you at SACNAS. I'll see you there. That'll be great.
Yeah, we'll have a mini reunion at SACNAS.
Yeah. I'm all about it. That'll be great.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Have a good night.
All right. See you guys later.